Federal authorities are investigating social media's role in provoking what we saw this week at the Capitol and allegations of future attacks being organized on apps like Parler. Joining us tonight to discuss the role of social media in this week's violence is Jamie Cohen, an instructor of media studies at Queens College, City University of New York, also a digital culture researcher. Jamie, thanks so much for being with us. Certainly a lot to kind of unpack and go through tonight. Let's start with the main headline in terms of Twitter banning the president. Certainly he was an avid Twitterer. His time in office, almost 90 million followers, very popular. The pushback I've heard most tonight is that this is a violation of the First Amendment and free speech. Can you discuss that idea?
Yeah, of course. That is probably one of our biggest misconceptions about the First Amendment, is that the First Amendment is restricted by limitations on the way we could talk about speech. So we can't say certain things because it could cause damage or could cause actual threats to national security or danger. But on top of that, I think people misunderstand that Twitter is private property and that it has the ability to kind of control that. On the adverse side, we have to recognize that maybe we shouldn't funnel all the information through a singular app to have that much political power over speech. Maybe there was a distinct problem. And the destruction of net neutrality creates a bit of a problem with us to have any type of competing type of information flows. And so it really does come down to, if somebody's going to be using a certain type of system to cause problems or incite violence, then it is up to that place to do that. You can't count cards in a casino, not because it's illegal, but because it damages the facility. You can't cause problems inside of a Target and throw things around because it causes problems. These are private property systems. We just have to understand that these systems aren't really understandable to everybody. We need a bit more of internet literacies for people to kind of get how these things function within our speech and our protected speech.
The power of social media certainly is undeniable, has been for years, and we're seeing increasing evidence that what we saw Wednesday during the riots at the Capitol had widely circulated on social media. The planning, the momentum building for it all. The president himself had tweeted about it, asking people to come down, and now social media is helping law enforcement identify some of the people involved. So it's an interesting kind of dichotomy there. What do you see as the role in social media in terms of what led to the violence we saw this week? And can you really control it?
Wow, that is a really good question. Social media is an amplification system. And so when people, it used to be one to many, it's just like news systems can speak to many people. Now it's many to many. And in that way, people use these systems to kind of amplify information. And the internet works on a reward-based system. So whatever you say, you kind of get currency in likes or in the upvotes of posts. And so sometimes what it comes down to is how much energy can you put into any type of situation to keep yourself relevant among other posters. And that type of system isn't really designed well for us to kind of get clarity of information. We don't really have a way of understanding downstream. But social media acts as sort of an authority of information when the real authority, as you know, is news, is people who do the research, is people who have spent their lives doing research and information of basically analyzing what the complications of life around us and giving it to us. Just having a flow of raw information to people incites some sort of energy, and that energy is rewarded. And if people keep rewarding those types of systems, it doesn't really have an end until people take action.
And the thing that's always struck me as so interesting about social media is that anyone can essentially, for the most part, tweet anything or put anything out there. You have to be willing to receive it. So if someone puts a theory out there that's, let's say, not true, that's one thing, but if people believe it, that's another, and you can't control what people believe. What makes some folks so susceptible to untruth?
Yeah, I think we're in a time of big changes and a lot of chaos and a lot of things that don't really make sense. And so when things become complicated, people seek answers. When people feel disenfranchised or disconnected from a political system or unable to have their own say, what they do is they seek people or community that gives them that type of solution. And so when conspiracy theories exist as answers. There aren't really easy answers for anything. And conspiracy theories can be debunked fairly easily because I don't think a single conspiracy theorist has solved a conspiracy theory. Usually the authorities solve those. And so, but that said, when people are online, when they see somebody who's given a valid response that fits their worldview or confirms their bias, they want to believe it. They want to feel like that's the truth. And it really causes damage because there's nobody around their community. We live in, unfortunately, something like ecosystems rather than ecosystems. The echo chambers have become the reality.
Jamie, very insightful. I appreciate it. And we should also point out that as part of Twitter's news tonight that it was banning the president, they said there's already chatter online about a talk about a secondary attack on the U.S. Capitol and the buildings in the Capitol complex on January 17th. So now specific targets again and a specific date. We're keeping an eye on that, but it underscores kind of the perilous time that we're in and how quickly things can spread. I could talk to you all night about this, but we're out of time. Thank you so much. I have a feeling we'll need to talk to you again, but in the meantime, have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you so much.